And welcome to our guest, Michelle Hood, President and CEO of Northern Light Health. Michelle, before you go into the details of your birth, I thought that you could just give us Northern Light Health in a nutshell.
Sure. Well, you just saw the film that is recently developed as we launched our new brand last October 1st. Our integrated healthcare system has sites of care from Presque Isle to Portland and many places in between. 9 hospitals, as you heard, and about 125 sites of service. So everything from our retail pharmacies to our clinics, of course, and we have probably as many beds in the subacute settings as we do in our hospitals. So we partner with First Atlantic for 6 skilled rehabilitative and long-term care facilities, and then we own 2 fully on 2 of our campuses. So we provide primary care to long-term care and everything in between.
I thought it was important for you to set the stage on just how massive the whole system is. Yep. And did you say the number of employees?
We've got, I think, at this point about 12,200.
Which I think puts you in the top 3.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's good.
There's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. A lot of people, a lot of patients, right? All right, so let's go back now. So the details of your birth include...
Yeah, I was there.
Yes. So where were you born? And
so I was born in Kokomo, Indiana.
Oh. Wait, isn't that's a fictitious place for a Beach Boys song, isn't it?
It is part of a Kokomo song, yes.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
But didn't live there very long. My folks, I'm the middle of 5 children. I'm the first girl in the family, and a lot of people say that explains a lot of things. The oldest, the middle child, and the first girl, put those together. And we moved to outside of Chicago when I was about 2 years old. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago.
But you went to high school in Connecticut, where you had some experience in journalism.
Yeah. So my dad got transferred to Hartford, Connecticut when I was in 8th grade, getting ready to go into 8th grade. So I did high school years in Wethersfield, Connecticut. And I was the editor of our school paper. And I was the high school correspondent for the little paper in Wethersfield. So I was in and out of that. I can still remember it vividly, the press office there, and dropping articles and columns every week for a couple of years.
You know, that is one of the qualifications to get in that chair, is you had to have worked at a newspaper or delivered a newspaper.
I did that too.
Yeah. Oh, you did?
Yeah,
so, okay. So that didn't come up. Wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah, we actually have roots open.
Yeah. My brothers and I delivered papers growing up. We sure did.
Great.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people have talked about how it's a very entrepreneurial experience, right? Managing, collecting, and delivering through all kinds of weather. Yeah. So I think that's really the key to your success, right? Okay, so then going into college, what did you pursue?
So I went to college at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana, mostly because I got a full scholarship through my dad's business. They gave out scholarships, 5 or 10 a year, I think it was, and if they were going to pay, that was great. So went to school there and had a undergraduate degree in biology, and thought I was going to be a laboratory scientist. So I started my graduate work at Purdue immediately post bachelor's degree, and my graduate work was in neurophysiology. So it was all about studying dogs' brains, if you can imagine, and didn't like it very much. I really liked the science, but I found I just did not thrive in the laboratory environment. Didn't see myself going to a lab every day for my career, and so as you all know, many of you have probably had the same experience when you're in graduate school. You make your way by being teaching assistant, you do the teaching of the undergraduate. So I was teaching laboratory science, and I went out one evening with a fellow faculty member for a pitcher of beer at the local watering hole, and I said, Paul, this thing is not going to work for me. And I said, what do you think? And he says, well, have you ever thought about healthcare administration or hospital administration at that time? And I said, no, I don't know anything about that. He says, well, you should really look into it because your science will really help you. I had a lot of courses in genetics and so forth. So I started looking into it. At that point in time, this was in 1978. There were not a whole lot of accredited programs. Hospital administration was just before that, you were a superintendent of a hospital. You kind of came up through the ranks, and there wasn't formal training until the late 70s. It really started to be a profession. And so I looked into it, and I was engaged at the time, and my fiance was in restaurant and hotel management. And so we found an accredited program in Atlanta, and we said, that's the place for us. We're going to get out of the cold and head south. So
which is interesting because then you ended up in Maine. So we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. So you're at Georgia State University then, correct? Yes, and getting... So in graduate school, and they had a residency program, right?
So today it's not as common, but back then, before you could get your degree, you had to complete a residency. And my residency requirement was a year-long residency. And the residency basically allowed you to experience every part of the organization. And many of my classmates did their residencies at insurance companies or social service agencies. So the degree I have, it's not just in hospitals, but it's health administration. So you can end up in public service or so forth. But I was intrigued with hospitals. I had worked in and out of hospitals during grad school. I worked at the 3 to 11 shift in the nursing administration office in a hospital in downtown Atlanta. Still remember taking the bus home at midnight. Probably wasn't a really good idea, but really liked the work within the hospital setting. Intrigued with all the different professions that kind of came together around, caring for a patient and a patient's family. So I was bound and determined I was going to do my residency in a hospital.
Mm-hmm. And then so your residency really turned into a full-time position where you stayed for 13 years.
Correct. I did my residency at Emory University Hospital, on the outskirts of the city of Atlanta. And I finished my residency in a year, and then the chief financial officer came to me and said, we'd like you to take over as director of material services because the person that had been in that position was terminated, actually. And it was a situation where I had spent some time in that department, as I had in all the departments during my residency. But I said I'd be glad to do that. The CFO was actually my mentor for many years, starting in my residency. And he says, "Don't worry, we'll recruit. It'll only take about 6 weeks or 8 weeks." And 9 months later, I was still the director of material services, which is the department that does all the purchasing of supplies and equipment for the hospital. It distributes the supplies to the various departments. I was responsible for central sterile supply, which prepared all the sets that go into the OR for the surgeons, and all the warehouse functions. So it was a fascinating department to have responsibility for, about 120 employees, and you got to touch every corner, every nook and cranny of the organization, from the boiler room to the OR. So it was a great experience. And
then I know you moved to Birmingham for a couple of years, but I'd like to fast forward to your time in Louisville, because that you really had an interesting opportunity there, where it was the merger of two hospitals, and you had a bring it together?
Yeah, so I was recruited to Louisville when Norton Health System had just acquired 5 previously owned hospitals in the suburbs. So before they acquired those hospitals, Norton had 2 adult teaching downtown hospitals and a children's hospital, also downtown Louisville. And they recruited me to run their 2 downtown adult teaching hospitals. So about 890 beds between the 2. And while they had supposedly been merged many years before I came on the scene, 5 or 7 years before I came on, there really were still very different cultures in these 2 hospitals, which were just a sky bridge apart from each other. So there had been an unsuccessful, I guess, or at least the preliminary steps to trying to bring the 2 organizations together and remove the duplication and really form one team and one organization had been difficult for them. And in fact, it was a turnaround situation. So when I came on board, those 2 adult hospitals were running at an operating loss of about $40 million a year. And so my job was to try to figure that out. So
yeah, and changing the culture or bringing the 2 cultures together was a pivotal piece. How do you do that? I mean, we all know that most folks are resistant to change. So you've got 2 separate hospitals losing millions of dollars. What are your steps? What are your 5 easy steps to turning it around?
A lot of listening, a lot of being present, not in an office, but out in the organization, getting to know the physicians, particularly because of the teaching responsibilities of the hospital. A lot of the resource allocation was related to the teaching functions, and so spent a lot of time with the chairs of the various departments of the medical school that used the University of Louisville Medical School that used the hospital as its teaching platform. Getting to know the department heads. One of the things that was fascinating to me when I went into that organization was that many of the department heads, most of the department heads, really didn't know much about the economics at all. And they were very good at what they were doing, but they didn't have the context of how it all fit together and the importance of trying to look for opportunities for efficiency and so forth. So it was really fascinating work. Within 2 years, we were just about at break even, and it was painful in many respects because it was a massive amount of change. But I ran into the chief of surgery, the chair of surgery, Dr. Polk, at the airport within the last 6 months or so, and in the Crown Room or the Sky Club. And I said, "Hi, Room." And he says, "Michelle, what are you doing?" And I made long-lasting friendships, but very difficult work. Yeah.
Then you went to Montana to run the state system there for a while. But let's talk about how you got to Maine. So were you on Indeed? Like what? How did you? So it was about 2005, right?
Yeah. Yep. 2005 was when the recruitment started, and in our organizations, a lot of what happens is, I'm sure in many of the businesses that you all work with, it's really word of mouth. There's a lot of informal networking that goes on to, and the degrees of separation as you stay in the business really get smaller and smaller. So I got a phone call one day from a recruiter who said, would really like you to take a look at an opportunity in Maine. And we had been in Montana at that time for about 6 years or so. And I love the East Coast. I love the New England from my Connecticut experiences. And I said, well, yeah, I'd be interested in looking at that. And so I came out and met with the search committee, and that started the process. And it was a long process. They really did a very intensive review, narrowed down the candidate pool and so forth, and ended up coming in April of 2006. 2006.
Had you been to Maine before?
Never.
Oh,
never.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and I made the mistake of, I was telling this story recently to someone, and they said I did the same thing, but I made the mistake in the interview, the first round of interviews. One of the search committee members asked me about, had I ever been to Maine before? And I said no, but I went to high school in Connecticut.
Oh my gosh.
And
it's almost as bad as saying I'm from Massachusetts.
Yeah, and he said, that is not the same thing.
No.
Okay. That same search committee member also said to me, so how do you like to drive? And I said, fast. And he says, well, if you take this job, you're going to wear out a set of tires about every 6 or 8 months. And I said, that's okay. I'm all right with that. So it was an interesting search process. A lot of unusual questions and descriptions of the work. So,
yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. So let's talk today about your team. So who are the folks that you surround yourself with, and did you inherit them when you got here, or have you built your own team, and what does that look like?
So, when I think about my team, it's hard to narrow it down because I'm in and out of our hospitals every week that I'm in state. I do some national work that takes me out of state occasionally, but when I'm in state, I'm usually in and out of our hospitals quite a bit, and I work with board members of all of our hospitals have fiduciary boards. So in total, there are 12 boards across the system. My immediate team is made up of the presidents of our member organizations. So the 9 hospitals, our home care and hospice agency, our foundation, my chief financial officer, chief operating officer, chief medical officer, that typical group. And that's what I would consider my nuclear team. On a day-to-day basis in my home office, I meet almost every day when I'm there with my chief financial officer and chief operating officer, and we have a formal meeting at least weekly. Mm-hmm. As far as inheriting, I inherited a lot of really talented people. But I also went through a wave of turnover with retirements and people. The average tenure of a hospital chief executive officer in our business is about 3.5 years.
Oh.
Thankfully, in Maine, we don't have that level of turnover, but there is normal turnover that goes along with this. But so I've added people over the years. I've probably reorganized the leadership team in my 13 years. I've probably done significant reorganization on 3 different waves. I'm a big believer that form follows function, and depending upon what we have in our strategic windshield, I try to organize the talent to make sure that we have the best chance for success for those strategies. So that calls for, at one time I had a chief transformation officer, no longer have that position. Yeah. So there's quite a bit of movement within the organization. I'm a big believer in recruiting and promoting from within. So a lot of folks that are in senior positions now have come from within the organization. But I also believe you need some fresh eyes occasionally that have seen other systems and how other systems work in different geographies. So it's a mix of the two.
And you must have a lot of opportunity for best practice sharing across the hospitals.
We do, but we're still not good at it. Yeah. We're still learning. I think we're better at it. So in building the system, when I came to Maine, there were 6 hospitals in the system. We've about doubled in size since I came on board in 2006. So we were about an $800 million organization, and we're now about a $1.5 billion organization. And in that process, we've had to completely integrate our governance structure. So the boards all operated in silos back then. The parent board had very limited accountability and responsibility. We've gradually built a very interdigitated governance structure so that members of the boards of, for example, Mercy Hospital here in Portland sit on committees of the system board. So there's a lot of cross-pollination, and we've done a couple of good waves of best practice sharing around governance. Likewise, we've interdigitated the leadership team.
What does interdigitated mean? I don't know.
So it's connecting it, but connecting it on a three-dimensional kind of way.
Oh.
So you're connected around points of service or about a particular project, but it's richer than that. It's the fact that we are part of one team and not just coming together for purposes around a singular topic, for example. Mm-hmm. So the leadership has been integrated, and we have probably at any one time maybe 30 or 40 teams that are working together on specific issues, and those are populated by people from across the system. So our folks get to work with their colleagues from Presque Isle and Portland and Blue Hill and Greenville and so forth on a regular basis. We're just now getting to the point where we're bringing our medical staffs together in that way. That's the hardest.
Yeah.
It's absolutely the hardest work that there is.
Yeah.
So, I had a board member tell me 2 or 3 years ago, "Wow, Michelle, you've gone through governance integration. We've survived all that. We went to a single balance sheet and a single obligated group and a common treasury. So you've done the financial integration. The leadership teams are working together. There's great teamwork there. You're done." And I said, "Well, you forgot about the patient care,
Yeah.
the medical staffs."
Yeah.
So we're working on that. But
what makes that so hard?
Just I think because physicians and all clinicians really, they're so focused on that individual patient and the way that they take care of that patient's family, that to think about the work that they do as part of a large system and the handoffs that go with making sure that patient's transition of care from an office visit to a hospitalization to a rehabilitation to a home care, they're focused on that patient that's in front of them that day.
Yeah.
So it's going, but it's difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in your strategic plan, how far out does that look?
Typically, we are on 3-year cycles. We happen to be in a 4-year cycle right now just because we have been working hard on updating our electronic medical record, and we didn't want to go through a strategic planning process until we finish that work.
Yeah, that's a significant lift.
Yeah.
And how do you track your success? So what are the metrics that you look at, and how often do you look at them? Daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly? What's most important to let you know that you're achieving your goals?
So we look at the scorecard, the leadership scorecard monthly on a formal basis. I get flash reports daily on certain statistics. I pretty much know what the utilization of our hospitals is on a regular basis, on a daily basis. We look at, on our monthly scorecard, we look at everything from compensation ratio to patient safety to, of course, financial results, the patient experience. So we have patient surveys that we get information from on a monthly basis. Mm-hmm. So lots of different measures.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now let's talk about employment there. So you said you have about 12,000 employees, but what are the toughest positions to fill?
So right now we're in one of the cycles where we have a nursing shortage. You probably all read about that in the papers, but
the paper.
Write that down. So nursing. So we employ about 12,000, a little over 12,000 employees. Right now we have 1,100 vacancies.
Wow. So about 10% of your workforce. Yeah.
And of course you can't do without those people. So we end up using a lot of travelers. And in the physician ranks, they're called locum tenens. It's a Latin word. Don't ask me what it means.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, not that the quality of those workers is not good, but they're not part of the team. They don't know our cultural DNA. They don't necessarily know our processes and systems, as well as someone who works with us full-time for some period of time. So nurses are very difficult. Some physician specialties are very difficult. We always have openings for primary care physicians just because there's a lot of movement in primary care. People that get out of school and come out of medical school on a J-1 visa, foreign medical, they are obligated to do work within places like Maine for a short period of time, and then they move on to other. They might go home, or they move on to other places. So a lot of openings in both nursing, pharmacy, respiratory therapy. Our home care folks are always looking for physical therapists. It's a very difficult position to fill within the home care setting. So across the board in the clinical area is very difficult. Information technology is very difficult because we compete with all the businesses here in the room.
Right.
And we're working really hard with the academic programs to increase the number of students in many of these key areas. We've been successful in working with the academic programs and increase the number of nursing students, but there's still not enough.
Yeah. So you're working with some of the colleges and universities for, investing in students now so they can become employees, but you also are recruiting externally, right, to bring folks here.
We are. One of our most successful initiatives within the last couple of years as far as nursing has been concerned is that we have a lot of foreign nurses, and they come through a company that provides a 2-year contract for them to stay within our organization, and then they have the option after that point of either staying or moving on. And we've been successful at keeping a lot of those foreign nursing students, and they come from Ireland, the Philippines, many places. And of course, the trick there is to make sure that we surround them and their families with a social network,
right,
that makes them not feel so isolated,
right,
and really become part of our family.
Yeah. So that's got. How big's your HR department, or is the recruiting centralized, or is it happening at all the different hospitals?
It's centralized but distributed.
Yeah.
So that we have it's run out of our talent team at the home office, but we think it's very critical that the actual recruiters be resident in the various member organizations because they need to know that community.
Right.
And because when you recruit, you're recruiting the trailing spouse or significant other and family, and making sure that they feel like this is a good fit for them is just as important as the individual who's going to come to work with us.
Yeah. Do you think Maine is a pro or a con when you're trying to get people here?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. I think that there are a lot of people who say that's not my thing. That's too isolated. Where is that? It was like when I got recruited to Montana, I said, is that one of those square states out there past the Mississippi?
Yeah.
So you just, a lot of people who just aren't familiar with it.
Right.
I can tell you if we can get them to come for an interview, we have a very good experience of bringing them on.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful state.
Right.
Why wouldn't you want to live here?
Right. That's how I feel about it. Yeah. So let's talk about your branding change, because I think a lot of people in the room, a lot of companies all think about it sometimes. Some of them have done it, some successfully, some unsuccessfully. So what drove that?
So when I came to work with Eastern Maine Healthcare back in 2006, one of the first things that the marketing folks told me is we need to change our name. And I said, okay, why is that? And they said, well, it doesn't really represent who we are. At that time, we were restricted to Eastern Maine, and there was a lot of confusion between, is it Eastern Maine Medical Center or what's the system? I remember in my early days being at a civic event, and I was standing alongside the CEO of the Eastern Maine Medical Center, and I was introducing myself to someone, and they said, well, welcome, welcome. And they turned to Debbie and they said, I'm sorry you lost your job. And I said, no, I'm not taking her job, you know. So there was a lot of confusion about what was going on in the system and so forth. But we took the idea of changing our name really seriously. It's a big step. And we had a branding steering committee that was appointed, had board representation on it, across the system representation. And we really worked at it for about 3 years because changing your name is a once in a generation at least kind of activity. And we didn't want it to be just about changing our name. We really wanted it to be representative of our journey towards becoming an integrated delivery system and not just a group of interested parties that came together occasionally for common purpose. But so we wanted a brand promise. We make healthcare work for you. We wanted commitments, and we wanted to be able to say that our culture was prepared to live up to those commitments. And so we worked at it. We worked with a national company who consulted with us, and we decided probably a year before October 1st of 2018 that was our target date.
Yeah.
And that date was chosen because it was about halfway through our digital transformation, going to a single electronic medical record platform across all sites of care. And it really was, as I described earlier, we had gotten through several waves of integration with governance and leadership, and we were beginning to work with our physicians and our advanced practice providers across the system. We were building clinical service lines. We were moving patients in a protocol-driven way at that point between sites of care and transitions of care. And we thought October 1st of 2018 was the perfect time to make the change.
And how is it going, and what's left to do?
Yeah, so I think it's going very well. I can tell you that it was met internally by most of our colleagues, most of my colleagues, with a lot of enthusiasm.
Did anyone say, "Oh, I hate that name"?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. A few people were like, "What's that all about?" In fact, one of the board members told me just within the last week or so. She said, "I never told you, but I hated it when it was announced." And she said, "But it's really grown on me. I love you got to peel back. It's not just the name; it's all the things that you saw on the screen and it's so Maine. The creative, the company that worked with us is Maine based, and they traveled all over. Those are Mainers that you saw in the film, and they're in all of our print and media. So but there's some folks out there who are still like, okay, so we decided that we were going to change the signs instead of this.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And then, how does it work with the individual hospitals, though? Because they all have strong brands.
Brands too.
Yeah, they do have good brands within their communities.
Yes. So we wanted to make sure that we preserve that, and so Mercy is Northern Light Mercy, Northern Light Eastern Maine Medical Center, Northern Light A.R. Gould up in Presque Isle. So the beginning part is to tie us all together, but we recognize and respect the differences in the cultures and values that are the legacy system.
Yeah. So let's talk about your leadership skills and how you operate as a leader, and what would you say your values or your principles are that you try to live every day?
I try to practice listening. And active listening, so that I'm really more of a someone who wants to ask questions and hear responses rather than espouse my opinion on something. I count on the folks that work with me to know their stuff better than I do, but to know what to share with me so that I can connect the dots when I need to do that. I'm a big believer in servant leadership, and I think that's very. It finds a very good spot in healthcare because most caregivers are servant leaders underneath their profession. I mean,
describe, what does servant leadership mean? What does it look like day to day?
So it's all about the higher purpose. You know, what is it that we're about? It's not about making the bottom line. It's not about making sure that we have more market share than the guy down the street. It really is community-based, looking at what is needed in the community. And healthcare has become, in my almost 40 years in this work, you know, hospitals used to operate very much within the four walls of the hospital. My first job at Emory, we didn't operate any clinics. That was the responsibility of the Emory Clinic, the group of physicians. Because of the way that it's become integrated into integrated delivery systems, we've now moved well outside of the four walls of the hospital. We're into the community in such a big way. Just this week, I've been in 2 board meetings where we've reviewed the community health needs assessment for that community. And the things that we're working on are the opioid crisis, up in the north, food insecurity, transportation. So when I think of servant leadership, it's really about that higher purpose. How is it that we are improving the health of the community and the individuals that live in that community?
Yeah, I mean, those 3 examples are exactly what's impacting Maine right now. So that's great.
But at the same time, you still have to make sure the supplies are in the OR when the doctor needs them.
Right. So, exactly. Now, when I met you in your office, I thought you were coming in from a trip because you had this giant suitcase. And I'm like, oh, are you coming or going? You're like, no, that's my briefcase.
Yeah.
So what's in it? What's in it?
A lot of paperwork.
Okay.
A lot of paperwork and usually 2 computers. Usually a laptop and an iPad. All the kind of cords and stuff that go along with that. I've got. I'm a big fan of the small like moleskin journals. So I have one, you know, for different topics. So there's usually 3 or 4 of those in there. I do a lot of work for the American Hospital Association right now. I'm sitting on the board, and so there's usually a whole stack of stuff related to what's going on nationally. That if I have 2 minutes, I can, you know, pull out and catch up on some reading. I consider it a good day when I can throw away about a third of what's in that because then I just load it up again.
Yeah. That thing is impressive. Yeah. So, so my next question is, like, how do you keep up with everything that's happening in the healthcare industry? I mean, do you ever sleep because the changes are just nonstop?
Yeah. No, thankfully, I don't need a lot of sleep.
Okay. But don't doctors say you need?
Yes.
Isn't it 8 hours?
Yes, that's what my mother says. That's what. So, you know, I get a lot of windshield time because I am out about a lot. So I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Oh, do you listen to Nancy Marshall's podcast? She's going to be your guest. Wonderful.
Yeah. So I keep up with it that way. I talk on the phone a lot, hands-free.
Yeah.
And I have colleagues scattered across the country, and so there's a lot of networking that goes on. What's going on in that's the beauty of it. You know, we're running these health systems, and I can call up a colleague in a different part of the country and say, "Have you seen this? What are you doing about this? How are you working on this?" The American Hospital Association keeps us. It's a great association. It keeps us really well informed. There's just a richness of the data that they provide to us, and I'm just, I guess, very lucky and blessed that I have good recall and retention. So I like details.
Yeah.
I try not to get too much into the details with my folks because I absolutely trust them to do that. But I'm kind of nerdy that way, and I like to. My chief financial officer, shakes his finger at me occasionally because I've already added up the figures before he comes into his meeting. He says, "I'm going to bring you that." I said, "I just had to do it, Yeah. I still have a calculator, So I love what I do.
Yeah.
So it's such important and good work that I don't think about it as really work. I think about it as my passion and what it is that I want to give.
Yeah. Now, you talked about picking up the phone and calling someone down the road. So tell me, what's your relationship with Maine Health? So are you collegial? Are you frenemies? How does that work?
In my 13 years, we've gone through many stages. So one of the very first things I remember still in the search process, was an admonition by the search committee chair that the candidate of choice would be asked to form a strong relationship with the other large system in the state, Maine Health. And when I asked, well, what's the status of that relationship now? And they said it was terrible. My predecessor and Maine Health did not get along, and I didn't care to ask why that was, who caused that, or who didn't work on that the way they should. So I came in April. In June of 2006, my board chair and I made the trip to Rockport, Camden, I don't remember where. We found a good restaurant, and Bill Karen and his board chair came up, and we had dinner together. And at that dinner, we shook hands and we said, we're going to find ways to work together. And for many years, we did. We formed a One Maine collaborative. We invited Maine General into that collaborative, and we found many, many areas where we could work together. When Mercy came into the system, that changed the dynamics a bit.
Yeah.
And Maine Health at that point couldn't find a way, I think, to be both collaborative and competitive. And I kept trying to make the point that Mercy doesn't compete with Maine Med. They're two very, very different organizations, but wasn't unsuccessful in really getting to bridge that divide until probably within the last year or so. We've found our ways back together again and are doing some really cool stuff together now.
Yeah,
I hope
great.
that we can announce within the next short period of time some work we're doing through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services together.
We do love to break news at Like a Boss.
I wouldn't think about doing it without Bill on the stage with me.
Okay, so. That's very wise. Very wise.
Yeah.
Right. Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. So let's kind of get into our final questions, and shortly we'll open it up for questions to all of you. So what's the best advice that you give, and what's the best advice you've received?
Oh, my goodness. The best advice I give probably is think about your work with your colleagues as if they're your family. So we do a little squabbling internally, but when we finish that squabble, we're tight. We're tight knit, and that takes trust. So a lot of advice around don't assume you know what was behind that comment. Go and ask. So transparency. The best advice I've ever gotten, probably from my dad. My dad brought me up, said it 100 times, honey, you can do whatever you want to do. He said, if you work at it hard enough, you can do whatever you want to do. Yeah.
That's great. So now, write your own performance review. So
there's some of my folks in the audience.
So what are your key accomplishments, your biggest successes, and what are your areas for development or improvement?
Well, my biggest accomplishment is that I've raised two beautiful, wonderful people. I have a son and a daughter who I'm very proud of. As far as my work is concerned, my biggest accomplishment, I think I can honestly say that I've worked in 5 systems, and I've left them better than I found them. I think that many people have told me that I have been their best boss ever, and so developing people and their aspirations and their passions and their skills has been, I think, a significant accomplishment. Mm-hmm. And what was the second part?
What are your areas for improvement?
My areas for improvement. I don't say no enough. So I should be more selective. One of the folks who works with me, and he's not in the room, so I can say it.
Although we are videotaping.
He says Michelle never saw a goal or an opportunity that she didn't put on the list to do. Mm-hmm. So I need to be more selective about that because it wears people out the scope. So.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing to be self-aware of. Yeah. So for sure. So if you didn't choose to pursue a path in hospital administration, what could you see yourself doing?
Well, not neurophysiology.
Yeah, right.
What could I see myself doing? I could see myself in social services. Mm-hmm. I also have, I love organizational dynamics. I have on one of the things on my bucket list is to get a PhD in organizational sociology. So I could see myself doing that in teaching. Yeah,
great. So what keeps you up at night? We know you don't sleep much, but...
Probably interpersonal issues. Trying to solve that equation of building the most highly performing team possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, what levers do I need to pull to get that dynamic to work a little bit better?
Yeah.
To get a little bit more energy around a common purpose, a common goal. Mm-hmm. So those kinds of things. Not what am I going to do about the banking issue that I worried about today, or that board meeting that I went to yesterday that didn't go quite.
Yeah. So it's a people issue. Yeah. So conflict resolution is something that I think a lot of people think about and struggle with.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's at the heart of that. What have you learned over the years is the best way to tackle some of this?
I think that tearing it down to the base, to the root. We say in healthcare, the root cause.
Yeah.
I think that's very, very germane to conflict resolution as it is to incident review and so forth. Because most times if you can get to the root cause of the conflict, it's solvable. Mm-hmm. It's when people layer on all this noise on top of the root cause and begin to attribute purpose or the reason why Joe said that. Well, you don't know the reason that Joe said that. You need to get to the root cause of the issue.
So here in graduation season, we have thousands of kids graduating. We would love for so many of them to go into healthcare because they're desperately needed. What advice would you give them? And what are there any skills that you would like to see coming out of the next round of graduates that you don't see today?
Well, I can honestly tell people that who are looking for a career that healthcare is a wonderful place to be. Even with all the challenges we have and the fact that we're going to go through another round at the national level of Medicare for all or whatever the debate will be. Healthcare is a great place to make a career because there are just so many pathways that you can choose. Mm-hmm. I've seen people come in entry-level positions in dietary or housekeeping or registration and so forth and find a way through schooling and skills advancement to department head positions and so forth. It's a really, you can make it a wonderful career. And it's at its core, it's a noble place of work. Sure. You're doing good things for people. I mean, you should be able to go home at the end of the day feeling really good about that.
Yeah.
Skills that I would look for in new grads, I think, people skills. Mm-hmm. And I think increasingly, not like the training that I had, most grads are getting trained in how to work in a team, which is nice to see.
Yeah.
But I don't think they have that critical thinking skill set, and some of that just has to come with experience.
Yeah.
So putting people, or young people in particular, in positions where they have to explore their critical thinking and apply it to complex issues and help them develop those ways to be analytical, yet consider the soft side as well.
Yeah. Glenn Cummings talked about that when he sat here about the importance of executive function and critical thinking and how that's something on the mindset over at USM. So what do you think the most important advancement in healthcare has been in your 39-year career?
Oh, my gosh. There's been so many. Well, I'm going to say none of the technical things that you might think of. I could point to a lot of the clinical equipment that's come out and the tools and so forth. Science is exploding. It's really fascinating to watch. I think the fact that we deliver healthcare today in a very team-oriented fashion, rather than a lot of people look back to the Marcus Welby days and say it's just about the doctor and his or her bag and home visits and so forth. It's so much bigger than that. The social determinants of health are now part of the equation.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest advancement I've seen.
Interesting answer. Unexpected, but awesome. Okay. Who has questions? Come right up to the microphone. We are ready to go for audience questions. Joan? Yeah. Could you go back to the microphone? Can you do that? Can you go back to the microphone? It's like 8 feet behind you. Yeah, sorry. Oh.
Come on back, Joan. I'm always good for the first question. Thank you for the conversation this morning. I'm thinking about delivery of healthcare in the future, and I take it you do not see a lot of impact for delivery through technology, but I'm curious about whether you see a possibility there. But even more, I'm wondering if we have low-hanging fruit in being so close to Boston and what a hub it is. And I wondered if you could speak to what success you already see in Maine's proximity to Boston, and also what you would like to see happen more and how we could leverage that to the betterment of the people of Maine.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do see increasing space for technology in the delivery of healthcare. Telemedicine is just really, we've just scratched the surface with it. And I can answer both of your questions together as one, because we have a clinical affiliation agreement with Mass General, and we are within a couple of days probably of signing our first telemedicine contract with them around neurosciences and stroke services for our entire system. And then we're going to tackle neonatal intensive care and pediatric intensive care and so on, so that we can get second opinions. Their physicians can see our patients from a distance. Well, they can transfer patients back to our hospitals from their hospital, and we can do their post-procedure care within our system. So huge opportunities. We already work with Dana-Farber very closely up in the Bangor area on cancer. We're working with them on developing a similar program here in Portland at Mercy. So I meet quarterly with Dr. Slavin, who's the CEO of Mass General, and almost as often with Dr. Lori Glimsher, who's the CEO of Dana-Farber. So there's a lot of collaboration there. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Joan?
Yes, mine is as much a thank you as a question.
I love those.
Because my experience of the intelligences that you have, and they are many, is unusual to encounter. And some of those intelligences are only facilitated by encounter. So this exposure that the newspaper has provided here, I hope you, in the ensuing years, will make yourself as available as what little spare time you may have to audiences, so that you can multiply the effects of what your life has taught you. I know you're doing that where you work, but to an even bigger audience, of diversity.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions.
Thank you. And the economy has been so impacted by Amazon and Uber and just the consumer ease and convenience, and generally kind of the administrative side of being a patient in a health organization doesn't kind of fit that same paradigm. And I'm just wondering what impact that's having on your organization and what you can and are doing to kind of bring some of that ease to that side of the patient experience.
That's a great question. First of all, Amazon has formed a new company together with Berkshire Hathaway and J.P. Morgan called Haven, and they actually are getting into healthcare. So we're looking towards that new company Haven to be a major disruptor in the work that we do in a positive way. I think we'll learn a lot from their contributions to the field. The patient experience and the ease of getting access to care is something that's really, really on our minds. So we're working hard at trying to deliver as much care as we can through a digital platform like your phone. We've just introduced within our system a service. Right now it's just to our employees, but we expect after we get the kinks out that we'll make it available to our patients who are not our employees, where they can actually get a doctor's visit on their phone. And it's for very limited things, like you would normally go to your primary care office, doctor's office for an urgent care center. You think you've got an ear infection or something like that. So we expect that there will be more and more demand, particularly from the millennial generation, who just are not going to sit in a waiting room. They're just not. So we joke about healthcare by Uber all the time, from the standpoint of how do you make that? There's some cities in the country who last flu season experimented with flu shots by Uber. They partnered up with Uber. Uber took somebody to the individual's home where you could meet. I mean, there's one city that you called your Uber. You selected the alternative or the option that you needed a flu shot. The nurse was in the car when you got in the car, and you went. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on like that. Some of those experiments won't stick, but some of them will. So no babies in the car, though. We don't do that yet.
And when it does, we report on it. So let me give you an opportunity to give us an update on Mercy's expansion, because we know that they just cleared a significant hurdle, as reported in the press article.
So I'm looking for Charlie. He's here somewhere. There he is over by the window. Yeah, so probably about this time next year, we'll be breaking ground for the Four River expansion. And I'm actually going to New York next week to meet with the rating agencies in case we need to issue bonds in order to support that project. We'll be announcing soon also the sale of the State Street campus. Mm-hmm. We'll likely close on that transaction within the next several months. And then we'll lease back what we need for as far as square footage on the State Street campus until we can get the Four River expansion completed.
Great.
So it's coming.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to that. Congratulations on moving that forward. Yeah. So, and now describe your Maine. So when you're not lugging your giant briefcase around, what are the things that the places that you like to go?
I love to go home. I live on Mount Desert Island on the west side and have a spot on the water out in the woods, very quiet. My husband and I have two labs that are my companions. So I love to do that. I love to tinker in the yard and in the gardens and so forth. I'm a photographer. I like to say I'm a photographer. It's probably stretching that a bit. I like to take pictures. Yeah. I used to be a fly fisher person. I haven't had my fly rod out for a while, so one of these days I'll get back to that.
I bet you learned that in Montana.
I did learn it in Montana. Yeah. Yep. we're a big college football family, and so I traveled to most of the home games at Notre Dame during the fall, so that takes up some time. Just being with my kids, my grandkids.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you so much for being down here with us this morning. Yeah. And thanks to all of you for joining us, and special thank you to all of our sponsors. And the sun will come out, hopefully tomorrow. So thank you, and thanks, Michelle.
Appreciate it.